Okay, this is a pretty straightforward format. Our panel session, I'll just throw it open to the audience. And who wants to ask the first question to the panel?
I'm wondering if you could, your opinion on, so at the moment, analysing lots of entrepreneurs, and credit rating is just a useless indicator of an entrepreneur because most of them screw up their whole credit rating and trying to create their business. I'm wondering if the panel had any opinions or some things we can throw out there about what the future of credit ratings might be and how this data can be used in analysing entrepreneurs from your perspectives and your research.
So I think that is a really interesting question. And of course, an entrepreneur is almost by definition someone who has a bad credit rating because they're doing everything they can, investing in their business, and they're probably perhaps trying to stretch out the payment terms as long as possible to stay alive and keep on par with the big boys that have big companies have enormously long payment terms and never get in trouble for it. So yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I think perhaps the answer is comparables. And I think the data you were talking about with when you're comparing similar companies and you're looking at companies that, comparing them on how much they pay for certain services or how much they invest in certain parts of their businesses. I mean, when human beings look at anything, they always look for a comparison. How do I understand this business? Well, I'll look at 10 other businesses that are kind of similar, and I'll work out how this business or this thing is compared to other companies or other things. So probably the answer is, there isn't going to be one metric that's going to tell you the answer about whether this is a good person or a good business to engage with. It's going to be more about the context. In what context is this company operating, and how are they doing in comparison to other businesses or people that I might have an understanding of.
Thanks. So I'd agree with the comparables. I think a lot of the time investors, if it's their first venture, you've got no track record, it's really difficult to do it. As over time people build up their record, people can start to see what happens when they're under pressure, what happens when they have a whole lot of money in the bank and they've got 3 years ahead of them. What do they do with that money? Do they spend a lot of it early on? Do they save it? Are they good at keeping to their budgets? You can build that over time, but it's not yet there. And I think there are more and more startups every day. There's more and more investment coming to the market, so it's expanding. So it's very difficult to see what people would have done in the past. And it's becoming more and more of a problem. When people reach second, third ideas, if they're a serial entrepreneur, then you can start to really see what they'll do in those situations. First timers, it's really tricky.
So the data that you're building, I noticed you said it's going to be private between entrepreneur and investor. Is there a big play with, let's say you get tons of traction and you have all the data on entrepreneurs, and is there any big play you could do with that data in the future? Any plans there?
We've got lots of plans around that. The way we want to work, we want to respect the companies and their data. Companies like Google, they will take your data if you use their service. You don't have a choice in that. They provide a great service off the back of it. If we have subscribers paying for our service, we will give something back to them in return for using their data. So obviously we won't name who they are for what they're doing, but if we can use it for trending with their permission, then we will use that and provide the reports back to them so that they can mine other companies too.
I agree with what's been said, but I've got a slightly different perspective. I'm coming at it from a different angle. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. When you're talking about things like credit risk, for example, people don't want to extend credit to entrepreneurs for a really good reason, because most startup companies go bust. It's just a fact. I mean, when I started up my own company, my expectation, my rational expectation, and my genuine expectation, I started up a company doing magazine launches now, starting up companies, I think a quarter of them are still going, essentially, after 5 years. In magazines, when you're launching a magazine, a consumer magazine, it's something like 1 out of 8 is still going after 5 years. starting a company on 35,000, which is what I did over 10 years ago, launching a consumer magazine. Probably the chances of it succeeding were probably 1 in 20, and you do that as an entrepreneur. I think the best entrepreneurs do that, not saying, oh, it'll all be okay, but knowing that actually the chances are it's going to fail, and what can you do to minimize those things? You know you're going to screw up. The point is not whether you're going to screw up, but whether your successes outweigh your screw-ups. And it's really difficult to tell. It's really difficult to tell from inside, and it's really difficult to tell from outside. From outside, you don't know what's going on inside. From inside, you don't know. You don't have that perspective. Someone asked me about this company called InfoArmy the other day, and InfoArmy was one that was basically crowdsourcing intelligence about companies. And they said, so they said, what did it get wrong? And I said, well, it got its audience wrong. It got its audience wrong because there weren't enough people prepared to pay $49 for a report on this company that was sort of adequately enough covered in public as it was. And there wasn't enough, but it had lots of publicity, loads of, there was stories in the press about it and so on. But I said, but actually that's really difficult to know at the time. It might have been a success. There's no way, it's a crapshoot doing this stuff. There's no way of knowing except after the fact that it's going to be done. If I were a electricity company or a landlord or something, why would I extend, unless I could, if I had the option of an established company versus a new company, why would I extend a credit to an entrepreneur? Because the chances are you're going to lose that money. It's going to do it. From an investor point of view, from a entrepreneur point of view, we do it for two reasons. One is because the payoff is good enough at the end of it to make it worthwhile. And the second is because that's who we are. We're driven to do it. It's not necessarily the money. We want to do this stuff and create it. From an investor point of view, what you're trying to do is, as I said, it's a crapshoot. You're trying to minimize the odds. Someone was talking to me in the government, from the government and from an NGO about, okay, well, we've got to be careful about market distortion. And I said, what do you think VC money is apart from market distortion? It's the idea that actually if we give extra money to this company, then actually it's got a greater chance of succeeding big than it would do if we didn't do it. That's the point about doing it. So what they're trying to do, what you're trying to do as an investor, and I think this is one of the things that your platform is trying to do, and to a certain extent the growth thing is trying to do, you're trying to say, okay, how can we get those odds a bit better in our favor? How can we have it so that we are, if it's a question of I need to spend some time investigating this company. Well, if I've got to winnow this down from 2,000 to 20 or something, then that's going to take me too much time to do. But can I winnow this down? Can I have the 40 down to 20 is a lot better. I can spend more time doing it, or I can see where I can help them identify opportunities better. If I can understand more about the day-to-day stuff, about what's going on, the idea that you want to know the company is failing, not when it's not been blogging for 3 months, which is one of the classic signs. You want to know before that so that you can either help them out or you can get out more quickly, So I think what we're all talking about is and actually I think it's really important if a company has been granted a mining license in Kenya that's been identified in the Government Gazette, or that something over there has been happened, or there's a FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act thing that started over there. I think all of these are really useful signals. I think what we're all talking about is the same thing in a way, which is moving away from the broad, if you like, mainframe perspective of doing this to looking at something as a lot more nuanced. And from an investor point of view, that's about getting those odds in your favour a bit better.
Excellent. Can we have that was a very good question. That was a very good question. Do you want to ask a question?
Business intelligence company, they are gathering and maneuvering. Is it going to generally conflict with the privacy or data protection?
So we get two types of emails pretty much every day. The first is saying your data is wrong, and the second is remove my company, I don't want my company to be on there. The data is wrong, we always check. In fact, we've got a button on the site to allow people to update it from the register. And I think, I can't think when the last time when the data was wrong and it wasn't wrong on the registry. There are other ones we have a standard letter that we set with standard response that we do. And the reason why it's so important is that often the justification is, well, my company went bust and I don't want people to know that my company went bust. You know, I want this dissolved company removed from there. I don't want people to see who the directors are of this company. And that's why they're in the public record. In fact, in the UK, the Data Protection Act doesn't apply to Companies House because it's an official register. Because it's important, and when you become a director of a company, you have a privileged legal position, and unless you do something fairly outrageous, and then you are personally protected. But in order for people to see what your past record is, in order for you to see who it is that's associated with and understand that, it's absolutely critical. You know, I've been involved in companies, and that's a matter of public record, and that's something that, well, okay, as you said, entrepreneurs often will lose, you know, will set up companies that will fail. But the fact is that failure is part of their record and is part of the public, you know, that's the deal that they make. They could have been traded on their own behalf as sole traders, as individuals, and in fact, that was what used to happen until the 1844 Company Act. You know, it used to have a royal charter or an act of parliament in order to set up a company. And all these mill owners and so on and all these other things were people were traded on their own behalf. That used to happen. But we give people processual protection, and the quid pro quo for that is that people should be able to see who it is and what is behind it. So there is the opportunity to... The point about privacy, and the UK law recognises this, is that it's a qualified privilege. It's one that you have, but if you decide to ask for this special protection, then it's something that you can that you give up. So I think in terms of there are, so I'm much more concerned about the fact, for example, that when you about what the credit reference agencies know about us, what the financial companies know about us. What the governments know about us is actually, well, I say to a bunch of, you know, I get this question in journalists all the time. I say, okay, here's the thing. You're investigating this senator, this politician. What would you rather have? Would you rather have their tax returns that they've given, or would you rather have all their social networking information? Would you rather have their traces of their mobile phone, where it had been? Would you rather have all the bank transactions? And actually, when this is all in one place, let's say you have a Tesco mobile and you have a Tesco bank account, and your phone says where you've been and which other shops you've been in, and you have Tesco insurance, and they know about your health and so on. You know, which is actually more of a privacy issue. So I think it's overstated.
Okay, should we take another one?
Just a very quick, short question. Can you name your three most exciting clients that you have, and describe your competitors about your businesses, what you're doing?
So our major clients at the moment tend to be banks. So there's only 4 in the UK, so only 4 major ones. So you know you can probably guess which ones they are. And competitors, well, this is a whole new and exciting space, and there's lots of people doing very, very interesting things. So where we came from, Growth Intelligence, is sort of out of the world of hot lists and sort of startup 100 lists, these kind of Deloitte Fast 50 style lists. So they've been around for ages and ages, and there are lots of companies that produce sort of companies that are coming up, companies that are bubbling, companies that are exciting right now. And in the US, there's even more, because of course there's no financial information, so you have to look at it some other way. The problem with those sorts of companies producing those sorts of lists is that it's very difficult to tie back to countable stuff. So, how do I know if this company is, well, Deloitte Fast 50 is actually a special case, but it's because it's actually using financial information, but it's self-submitted. Other sort of hot lists are based on, things like Twitter mentions and web traffic and that sort of stuff, but it's very difficult to tie back to actual countable money, and so it's less relevant. So there are companies like that produce these kind of hot lists. I suppose that there's kind of where we came from. There are other companies using very similar techniques to us. So, for example, there's a company called Quid in the US, QUID. Actually, two British guys. Sorry? Yeah, they are. Yeah, so they're in Silicon Valley, and they've got some fantastic technology to map technology, the world of technology. It's fantastic stuff, and it's using language. Very, very, very smart. It's not quite tying that back to money, but it's still very, very interesting stuff. There's a company called temporarily forgotten the name, but is in New York, and they're also looking at signals that happen on the web and tying that back to interesting financial information. In London, there are companies like DueDill, which was on your screen earlier, who are doing very, very interesting stuff with gathering lots and lots of information and sort of churning it together, and in a sort of data platform. There are crowdfunding platforms, there are crowd lending platforms that are using lots and lots of data. So yeah, it's a very, very exciting world.
So at the moment we're in beta. We're working in a closed environment. Our customers we're kind of keeping on the down low because it just makes sense to do that at this stage. The moment we go live, then anyone that lets us talk about it, we will do that. Their investors will certainly know they're using it. Our major competitors, we don't compete with AngelList, although we're often compared with them. We do something much more sort of closed than that. There's a company called Gust in the US, which is backed by New York's probably most famous angel, David Rose. It's a tool that does a lot of what we do in our beta version, but it's basically built around deal flow to take companies for David Rose and other angel groups to invest in. We want to bring the metrics into the startups, so we bridge deal flow with accounting systems, CRM systems, and everything else. As of yet, I haven't found anyone that's actually trying to do all of that.
So one of the problems with being open data is that, and allowing open access to our API, is that people use us without us knowing about it. And we only recently started to find out who uses us. And we find out from all sorts of reasons. So we were talking with someone who we now have talking with quite a lot with PwC in DC, and they explained about these people that they found out that were using us, and they were having a conversation with them in the same business, and they're one of the other big four, and it turned out they were using us as well, and we just didn't know. Now that's because they're using the web interface. What we expect to happen over the next year, 2 years, is for them to be built into their business processes. And actually, the fact that this is starting to happen, we were getting massively scraped. Now, we actually don't mind people scraping us. It would be a little bit hypocritical, but we'd rather they use the API to do it because it's much less of a load on the servers. And we have an API that they could do that with. But it was it was sort of really what you'd think of as heavy-duty scraping. And by that, I mean 20 simultaneous clients from different places, from different parts of the world, using a range of 150 different IP addresses, all with different headers saying there were different user agents and so on. It was just the types of queries that we discovered it. Probably it could have been some of it requests came from the US, some came from Czech Republic, some came from Hong Kong, Singapore. Don't know whether it was Chinese, was it Russians, was it an intelligence agency? Just don't know. Anyway, what happened was that dripping money. What happened was, in order to stop it taking the site down because it was so heavy, we had to put some throttling on the site, and we did it so that it wouldn't affect most people. so that your IP address could make loads of requests per minute, but it wouldn't affect most people. And that you'd have to be searching in such an odd way to do it. And what happened was that we started getting some email requests. So we get it from this international law firm, or this international law firm, or from HSBC in India, saying, we've got some people, and we're using it, and so who are using Open Corporates, and we keep getting blocked out, saying you've exceeded your amount of use things. And the reason it was hitting them was because they were using a single or small number of IP addresses, corporate proxies to do it, and they were being throttled by it. And so it's actually been really interesting to find out who's been using it and how. And then we can say, okay, look, we'll whitelist these IP address for a fee and so on and so on. So. And we will probably in about the next month. I think we've got the price list finalised now. We've just got a few other things to sort out about pricing for the API, so that you can get the data and also have it under a non-share-like license. Our competitors, it's a little bit. We don't really see them as competitors. We are sort of like we're the digital camera people who are doing really low resolution, crappy digital cameras, whilst people are doing beautiful film cameras. It's like it's a bit off to one side. We're not trying to do exactly the same thing, and we are doing some of the same audience, but in terms of many respects, do you know what? If you're a bank and you've got a existing feed from DNB or from Bureau van Dijk or whatever, then just keep on doing that, because it's not whatever we've got for you for that basic data for companies that are in the West, that publish financials publicly, that does that, then it's just not worth changing to us, because we don't have that data, we don't have that, that sort of detail, we don't have those sales staff to support your business either. But what we do have, in the same way that with OpenStreetMap, it turned out that actually they were really good at doing the developing world. And actually now OpenStreetMap is better than Google Map in many parts of the UK even, just because you start to get network effects. And people want to use OpenStreetMap, like Foursquare don't use OpenStreetMap because it's open, they use it because it's not Google. So what you can start to do is you start to build these network effects and start to do some good stuff. I don't really see Bureau van Dijk, DNB, any of those people as our competitors. I actually see more than anything else, I see more of a battle between the closed and the open world. And I think that we want the open side to win. And we want, and from a business point of view, it's really important is that what we think that businesses should be based on adding value, that margin should be based on adding value, not on rent-seeking business models. So that's what we're for.
Once the camera's on you.
Hi, my name's Patrick. Just a really quick one. You've spoken a lot about some interesting projects which you guys are in, and you're showing some of what I think a lot of people see the future of business intelligence to be. It seems to be around aggregation. It seems to be around visibility. Now, for me, I think where we get to really interesting areas are where machine learning is combined with human insight, and where we start to be able to come up with predictive modeling using these business intelligence tools, which you guys are bringing to the market. I'm just wondering what scope you see for predictive analytics, either with your own projects or in the larger market over the next 18 months to 5 years. Where do you see this going, and how would you like to position yourself for this?
Difficult but good question.
So my background originally was data centers and infrastructure, and over the past 8-9 years, I've seen that change into people moving into platforms. They're consuming everything online. I think the aggregation and machine learning is just a natural step that's going to come into play. The technologies that currently do that are reasonably raw, and people are having to write their own algorithms. I think it's only a matter of time before we start to see open source technologies that will help people get to that point. We're seeing it with the technologies people are using for anything that's big data, with the databases, different ways of doing things. We've come out of a very static data age, and now we're sitting in a position where we have access to things much more quickly, systems that can support that, and you don't even have to buy all the infrastructure yourself to do it. So there's many more exciting things down the line. We certainly intend to leverage that.
I think that's so predictive analytics is a broad term. So there's, it's a really hard question because so much stuff is predictive analytics. Everything from credit risk to predicting the value of wine and the weather, and it's a very broad world. It's almost in every single business. There's some level of predictive analytics, and of course, human brain is just one big predictive analytics engine. So, I think obviously we're going to build machines that are better at using it's essentially a heuristic, so a rule of thumb. Humans are very good at kind of gathering patterns of things that happen a lot. So it helps you when you're hunting to know that, there's a rock there, and when a mammoth goes towards it, they tend to go to the left, and that's where you throw your spear. And what we're doing in machine learning is just building computers to be able to do that a lot and a lot faster. So you're absolutely right. There are lots more kind of open source projects being exposed now. Things like Vopal Wabbit, which is a really fast machine learning system for recommendations engines and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's going to become more open source. It's probably going to become faster, but I think it's probably a tricky question.
So I often say that as amongst the universe of ex-magazine publishers, ex-consumer magazine publishers, I'm probably one of the best data modelers in the world. But when it comes down to, and not a bad coder in that universe either. But in absolute terms, I feel, I'm not a computer scientist. Well, I think as Tom said, it's a really interesting question, and there's a lot wrapped up in there. When we're talking about predictive, we're talking about not just predictive, but we're talking about actually finding insight in places that haven't had insight found them before. One of the things, there's a number of things that interest me in that, the goal for high frequency trade, the goal for high frequency strategy, can you knock a few more microseconds off it? We were having a discussion with the Financial Stability Board about this global legal entity identifier, and somebody who was working with there wanted it to be just numeric rather than alphanumeric, because it would mean that they could store it in fewer, they could store it as an integer essentially, rather than having it as alphanumeric. It would be fewer bits sent down the wire essentially, and I couldn't really see the benefit for that, because it's going to benefit everybody. It's just going to make things go faster. It's just, it's not actually absolute terms. It's terms. But anyhow, that's an example. But nevertheless, we had a crash. Nevertheless, the people missed the wood for the trees. Nevertheless, there's all that insight that hadn't been done. I did a seminar with a really experienced business journalist from Reuters at an investigative journalist event last spring, and I said, and he'd asked them how many there were about 100 people in the room, and he'd asked them how many of the business reporters, and there were about 80% of them put their hands up. It got to my turn, and I said, how many of you know what transfer pricing is? And maybe 10 or a dozen hands. And it's like, if you're a business reporter, and you don't know what transfer pricing is, how do you expect to understand what the nature of a company structure is and why it's like that? So I think that and to me, that's one of the interesting things. There's all this stuff that's being put out there, all of these official stuff. There's an environmental statement over here. One of the reasons we pull in, for example, the Central Contractor Register of the US is not just because it's useful to know who the contractors of the federal government are, because it's got email addresses and it's got telephone numbers and it's got addresses in there as well. And it's also got industry codes, which are quite difficult to get hold of in the US. So actually pulling those together and combining it with something over there. Mitt Romney on that statement, the address that he gave at that point was actually a residential address. Now, even at that point, it was quite unusual for people to give residential addresses. Those things about what somebody said then, if you take together the environmental statements of a supposedly green company, multinational, and do a diff between what they said this year versus last year versus the year before versus the year before that, then what do you get? How do you start to find something there? So whilst the looking at the future and looking at the current stuff is important, there's also real gold to be found in those insights in the past, and also making sense of those and with the context of the current as well. One last one is to do with corporate networks. If you looked at the corporate network of Enron, for example, it would have been incredibly complex. Was that a good thing or was that a bad thing? If you're using things like if you want to be able to say, okay, well, listen, there's been a lot of talk about the double Dutch sandwich and so on, and actually using these tax methods. What if that's closed down? What impact will it have on this company, this company, this company, that are all using that sort of same mechanism? Can you find that in the graph shape? We're storing the graph stuff in a graph database because so we can do those. Can we find this sort of shape that's an indicator of this? Here and here and here. So I actually think in terms of the data that's already out there, that there's an awful lot, which is what Tom guys are doing, which is actually, it's not necessarily making new data, it's actually just bothering to spend some time on the data that's already out there and not taking the received wisdom, which is not just laziness on the parts of the new businesses, it's that classic innovator's dilemma. We've got people who are buying this service, we've got people doing it, how do we just keep on serving our customers, whereas somebody is coming from who doesn't have a position is saying, okay, well, what can we do that's different? Where can we see the opportunity in that? So I think there's some interesting stuff. The only other thing I'd say is that one of the areas we're looking at is natural language processing, and particularly natural language processing techniques that can be applied to multiple different languages and different alphabets. So we're talking with some academics who are doing some really deep level research on that. That's probably not going to see the light of day for another 18 months. Just because we've got some good data that they could use to test it, and also they've got some interesting techniques that could be useful for us as well.
Wow. Okay, well, that's the end of our panel session. Thank you, Tim, Tom, and Chris. Thank you very much. Would you like to? Very good.